How's everybody doing?
Good, sir. How are you?
I'm good, Sanjay. Good. You have a good weekend?
Yeah, it was okay.
Good. Oh, okay, good. So people are coming in. I'm pretty good. I'm pretty good. It's a little bit disruptive weekend. My son-in-law got COVID, and so my daughter had to leave wherever she was, where she was staying with him. So, but she got tested, so she doesn't seem to have it. So that's good. But yeah, he's okay though. They live in Buffalo, so it's a little bit, I think, different there. How easily, how protective things are. uh, okay, we got Dan's trying to get in. Okay, well, maybe we'll get started. Oh, here we go. Yeah, there we go. So I'm going to bring up the. So I just before the class, I loaded uh, a Microsoft project file that we'll maybe take a look at after I just go over a few highlights. So it's loaded there. It should be under the lectures for discussion in lecture 4. So that should be there. And we'll see how that plays out. So, but I wanted to just go through some of the highlights in 4A and 4B. And can everybody see that okay?
Good morning, sir.
Morning. How's it going?
Good, and you?
Excellent. Thank you. Can you see the PowerPoint slides okay?
Yes, sir.
Great. I'll just let PJ. Okay, great. So, yeah, lectures 4A and 4B, the videos, I think they're pretty important as far as really understanding project management, I think. So it's, there's some lectures that I maybe place more importance on, some that I place less on, but I would say 4A and 4B, I would put very high on the list of making sure that uh, it makes sense to you, all right? Because that's if you really grasp what's in 4A and 4B, I think that you can really start applying things out in the field in a very positive and direct way. So 4A is about kind of a method that I kind of developed, but all it is really putting together a series of points on the way that you should think about recovering time. And so to recover time, you can't recover time unless you've updated. So you have to have gone through things and updated your project files. So whatever schedule and cost that you've been incurring or whatever you've been doing on your project, then what the updating is going to do, it's going to tell you where you are. So if you don't know where you are, then it's pretty hard to recover time. And the other aspect is, of course, with updating is why did we get where we are? So that's an important question to be asking when you have a plan and then things don't quite go as planned, which is typical. Very, that's not unusual. If I'm stressing anything in this course, I'm stressing that, it's good. You need to have a plan, but then you also need to be able to monitor it and control it. And so that's where cost control, schedule control all come into play, because if we don't control it, then we just lose it. So I also bring in a point here, which I'll probably bring up a few more times in the course. There's a little matrix I want to go over at some point on this. But when we make a plan too, we are kind of playing out probabilities. And well, we should be thinking in those terms. What's the most likely chance that this will happen? If it's reasonably possible, then that's probably a reasonable direction to take. You also have to look at what I didn't get into this on the video is you also have to look at the downside. So if it's 90% possible, but it's 10% that it might not occur, but if it does occur, it's going to bankrupt you. Well, then that's probably still not a great pathway, because it means 10 times out of 100 you're going to go bankrupt, right? So you got to look at the downside too. Usually the downside's not like that magnitude, but that should also be a consideration. You know, you don't want to just say, oh, well, it's a 75% that this will work, but 25% that this is going to destroy us. Well, maybe that's not a good, that's still not a good plan. Now, if it's 90% that it's going to work and 10%, well, we're going to have to replan it, adjust it, and change it if it doesn't work. Well, that's fine. That's probably a very good direction to go in. So we should be thinking in those terms, because also when we recover time, so we update a schedule, when we see that we're behind or we see that things aren't going the way that we planned, we have to come up with a methodology of how to get that time back, which, as I said, you know, I've broken down into what I call this direct method, that if we're going to try to get the time back, what's the likelihood this is going to work? If it's a very small likelihood that it's going to work, it's probably not the best way to go. And the biggest problem with this is with the software idea that we've been using. Doesn't matter what the software is. If you're trying to replan something, you can pretty much always make it work on paper. The question you got to ask yourself is, what's the likelihood this is going to work in reality? And if it's pretty good, then it's pretty good. And then that's a good direction to take. If it's not so good, then that's not too good a direction to take. So I kind of, in my example in the video, kind of discussed that when we talk about getting the C in the direct method, which is commitment, from others, and knowing what's the reality of them being able to come through is important when we're trying to recover time. So there's actually a lot of research that's been done on decision making and what drives decision making and how to think about decisions. So it is important to kind of understand the decisions you make and the ramifications that are possible, because there's very few things that are 100% for sure with things. There's always these variables, and we've talked about them, like when we talked about VUCA, etc. So it's good sound practice to have a good methodology to follow, and then to always be questioning things, because that helps. If you don't question things and you don't review things after the fact, then that's a bit of a problem. And that's where you won't really improve as an individual or as a business in this area. So we kind of have to do that. And I kind of go through this part here in the video pretty well, so I won't do it here. But definitely we'll be doing this in the labs. And I'm going to have a little case that I want us to discuss in a few minutes about how we actually recover time. But you would have done something like this last year, where you would update the file, you would set a status date, that's the date you update to. In a case like this, you know, this looks like it was supposed to finish on Tuesday, and then it looks like it didn't finish till the Friday. So that's putting actual starts and actual finishes. Very important to get an understanding of what you're inputting, because there's so many different types of names that are used, and it can get very confusing with all the starts, the finishes, the actuals, the baselines, the early starts, the late starts, late finishes. But actual means we're actually doing something. So we actually started implementing this project, and this is what happened. And just, that's great. So we know it's 100% complete because it's got a line drawn through it. We know that it's at now 7 days duration, but there's other things we don't know about it, right? So that's where looking at it in the variance table. And there was a little bit with some labs, some people were having a little bit of trouble getting to the different screens. So this is the variance screen, which is very important when we're doing updating. The cost screen is very important too. I didn't really get to that in the lab last week, but we'll start talking about it today. So we've got a start variance and a finish variance. So that means we started 1 day late and we finished 3 days late. So as I said, going back to the aspect of thinking in bets, probabilities, in other words, you'd want to know, well, why didn't this happen? What caused this to be 1 day late? Did the client not allow us to access the site soon enough? Did the forming crew not show up? Were we not ready for them? There could be a lot of reasons why this is 1 day late. Well, it's good to know. Why is this 3 days longer? Well, we know it's 1 day because it started 1 day late, right? So that explains one of those 3 days. But the other 2 days, what happened with that? That means it took 2 days longer duration than we planned. Because if we look at the bottom bar, which is the baseline, right? It's 5 working days, but it ended up taking 7 working days, 7 days duration. And so it ends up being 3 days longer. So there's different questions that you're trying to answer here, right? Why did we start 1 day late and why did it take 2 days longer? Now, the 1 day late, if we're doing 30 floors, that might not be an issue anymore, right? So that might be a non-issue coming up on the rest of the floors. This might be an ongoing issue. So if we've got 30 floors, well, we would not only end up being 3 days late, we would end up being 61 days late if we took all 30 floors, if we followed that trend. So that 2 days, then we have to think about, well, what caused that? Did we not have enough resources? Did the forming sub not, if they're down as a cost, did they not bring enough resources? If they're our own people and they're self-performing, did we not have enough resources on site? What's the skill level of the crew? Did they have the proper equipment? Was there a delay in getting the equipment? What was the issue? Right? You'd want to know that, because is this something that's going to carry on for the rest of the floors if we don't do something? Or is this a one-off? Maybe it was just a learning curve. You know, you're setting up, you're learning the system, and then it's just going to repeat. So it's going to be a lot quicker in the future. So if that's the case, then we know we're only dealing with a 3-day variance, and that is, we can get our act together by improving our productivity rate through the learning curve. And this 1 day variance won't happen again. Then we only really have to worry about these 3 days. Otherwise, we've got to worry about these 3 days, and we've got to worry about making sure that it's not progressively adding to it floor by floor. So it's why we want to find that information out. The other reasons we want to find out, well, if this was delayed by the client, we'd want to make a note of it. Maybe this project has liquidated damages. If we're there longer, it costs more. So like if we're there longer, 1 day longer, maybe there's $10,000 liquidated damages per day. Well, we didn't cause that delay. The client caused that delay. If that's the case, we want to make sure that we note that, because we don't want to be responsible for liquidated damages on something we did not cause. So that would be very important to do. So documenting the whys of what's going on is important. And if we do this during the process of updating, it's easier to remember. It's what we call contemporaneous documentation, which is the as-built documentation for the project. So I would be putting a note here and, double click on the activity. You could select the notes, and I would be explaining why this was 1 day and why this was 3 days. So that I could remember that, because later on, it's hard to remember. You'll find out when you do the assignment, if you don't put notes, it's like, what was I doing there? What was the reason for that? And then it's kind of like, it's more of a struggle. And thinking back like months and months on something, good luck. So it's hard to keep that in mind. So this helps you to document it, and it helps to protect you from claims that may be against you or liquidated damages. Or if you need to make a claim at the end of the project because you kept getting delayed by the client or their consultant, it'll add up. And then maybe you'll have a claim for 25 days. And if you're there 25 days longer, well, how much is that costing you? that's again, if we put variable costs on the schedule, it'll be easier to demonstrate why it's that much more money. Because you'll see as the project gets updated, the variable costs will increase. If there's, so that's a for sure, the variable costs will increase. So that's helping you to get a justification going. So you kind of work through this. So I'm not going to do all of this here because I kind of did it in the videos, but step by step. The next update is like for a 1 month period, and you're doing it for that 1 month period, and inputting exactly what went on your project so that this ends up reflecting what's actually going on in your project, inputting the data, and then seeing how things come out once you've updated it. So seeing how things come out once you've updated. In this case, we never fixed the 3 days, and it's gone from bad to worse. Now it's gone from 3 days to 8 days. So we now are 8 days behind schedule, and that's kind of our variance. And this is where the tracking screen is very helpful, because we can see, and we would have again documented what caused the delays, right? So we would have been looking at that and what caused the delays. And if we're done that, then that's history. So if we've updated that, we put notes, what's been going on. Updating, you should think, is absolutely historical. It's thinking backwards. So at that point, then we want to start changing from the updating process to start thinking about the recovery process, which is thinking forward looking. It's being proactive into the future, right? And we want this information timely so that we can act on it, so we know what's going on. So the more timely it is within reason, the more important that is too. And there's a bunch of ways that we can also get data by the week to better understand what's going on. We'll talk a little bit later about lean construction methods, where they actually will put on activities planned percent complete. So how many activities did you plan to get finished during a week? And that's where it's really broken down into the details of what's coming up in the next week and how many activities are there. Maybe there's 25 activities and we got 20 out of the 25 completed. So then we're really running at about 80% planned percent complete, which is not horrible if you go by lean methods, but it could be improved upon. Usually a really good number is around 90% if you can be in that zone. Most projects, through research, shows that most projects for their planned activities, very often it's running between 54 and 60%, which is very low as far as running a successful project. And we'll get into that in a little bit more detail later on when we look at short-term planning and short-term scheduling and short-term cost control. And that's what we were talking about in last week's lecture when we sort of looked at the difference between cost reporting and cost control, trying to get the information that it's timely enough that we can apply that feedback to the rest of the project so it can be helpful for us, as opposed to when the project's over, having all of this data, but not having been able to use it during the process of construction. So yeah, so you look forward, and then I kind of go through it in detail in the video. You really go through it step by step, looking how you can recover the time, how you can recover the cost. So time and cost work together in the direct method. You really have to look along the critical path. So that's what I call the D. You need to detect along the critical path the opportunities for where you can get time and money back. The I is you want to look more immediate. I don't want to look at the end of the project. I don't want to look at the 30th floor when I'm on the first floor, how I'm going to save time, how I'm going to save money. Why do you think that is? Why would I want to get it back sooner? What does it matter as long as I get it back? Why do you think? Let's give that one a try. If I'm using the direct method, why? Why do I want to look in the next month if I can, as opposed to 6 months down the road or a year down the road? Who wants to give that a shot? Giancarlo, you want to give it a shot? Or Leanne, how about you?
You want to look for immediate savings rather than later on,
And why is that?
because later on it might be even more. You want to like reduce the costs.
Yeah, later, you know what? If I don't fix it soon, later on, there's going to be something else, right?
Yeah.
There's always going to be something else. That's where lecture 4B comes in. So as I was saying, this is pretty important to really sort of get a picture of it. So I'm just going to say, if you have trouble visualizing it, really go through video lectures 4A and 4B. And I think it will pull a lot of stuff together from your whole program, not just what we're doing here, but for sure what we're doing here. So yeah, so we want to detect along the critical path, because shortening activities that have float, they don't save us time. And if we've got variable costs like a project manager, a site super, trailer on the whole project, saving float time doesn't save us any money, but saving days on the project definitely saves us money. And you'll see it in real time when you do these updates with some example projects. So I want to save it sooner, because then next month something else is going to happen. Next week something else is going to happen. There's always going to be something. If I take my flexibility out at the end of the project, so I can't save any time, I can't save any money, by the time I get there, then I'm really stuck when something happens. It means I'm going to end up being late. When I'm late, I'm going to increase my variable cost, which is going to up my costs, and I'm not going to get any extra compensation for that. In fact, I might have to pay liquidated damages as a result of it. So there's a lot of negatives to that going on. So I definitely, detect along the critical path, look immediate for the time saving. So I is more about time, but it also ties to, right, R, which is look to reduce your costs. So R is about the cost. I is about the time. R is about the cost. So they kind of work together, the I and the R, because I could save time pretty easily by working the weekends, but maybe that doesn't play too well with the R, because I got to pay overtime for the weekends. So maybe that's not as good. In some cases, it might be worthwhile doing, but in some cases it might not. So you got to look at that. You got to evaluate it, or you can even try it to see the impact that it has. You can run different scenarios. So that's where we get into the E, DIR, reduce. So detect, right? Immediate, reduce. The E of direct is experiment. You've got this laid out on the software. You can try different things and see what the impacts are. So you can experiment with it and see what makes sense as you try to get the time back. And I go through it step by step in the video. Like here, you can tell I made them work one weekend to try to help to reduce the cost, because maybe I was seeing there was a little bit extra, but the time, but this was worth it. So in this example, I don't really do it with cost. In a few minutes, when we try the experiment, the little discussion case we'll try, we do it with cost, and then you'll see, you can compare it. But definitely you would look for the no or low cost solution first. Experiment, try it. So if you try something and you get an idea of a pathway, because you know what, there's a lot of different things you can do. I picked, I think 4 or 5 things I did to end up getting this back to 0. So I did it kind of step by step, and I did 4 or 5 things, including putting some negative lags, including working a weekend, including adding some resources to shorten durations. So I did about 4 or 5 different things. It'd be nice if I could just do one thing and get all the time back and all the money back. And I would do it if I could. But very often in projects, you've got to be very creative, very innovative, good at problem solving. And that's actually, I find this part of it a lot of fun, because then you can really see the rewards for your efforts when you're actually able to keep things on track. It's one of the fun things about managing projects. The not so fun thing is things getting off track. The fun thing is being able to pull them back and get them back on track. So if I do come up with something, as an example, if I've said we're going to work this Saturday and Sunday, and this is a subcontractor, and they say they're not going to work Saturday and Sunday, my probability of success here has gone to 0, because they said they're not going to work. So it's not going to work. It works on the plan, it works in the software, but it won't work unless I get C, which is the commitment. I get the commitment of the people that are involved in the solution. Now, even in the experimenting process, I can involve them in the experimenting process as well. So, I can have a collaboration in effect that helps give me ideas, or give out the team ideas that we can try different things. And then we can see how it's rolling out in the schedule and cost-wise. If it's a BIM project, it can be even animated on a schedule to demonstrate visually how this would actually happen. It might help to clue in to ensure there's not some unforeseen thing going on that you don't see either in the drawings, the specifications, or in the schedule. Now you're seeing it in a virtual reality model. So that's starting to become more popular too, in those cases. I think I mentioned I had a student, maybe in the first class I said it, but his name is Kyle Bryant, and he works for Bird Construction, and he was doing a huge community center in Calgary, and he had issues with the productivity rate of the masonry subcontractor. And they had this architectural block, and it was this huge, like, it was not a little community center. I don't know of any community center in Toronto that is even half as big as this community center. So it's like this multi-faceted community center with 4 ice rinks, a huge central library, gymnasiums, FINA certified swimming pools, Olympic sized pool, all of these things. So this was this big complex. And so there were, I think it was around 100,000 architectural blocks in this project. There was a lot of details, and the masonry subcontractor was behind schedule. So when they updated, you could see that they were behind schedule. And when they looked at their productivity rate, they could see that if they extended that, so let's say, for example, 10,000 blocks, if they extended that for the rest of the project, it would not only be like it was in their update, 2 weeks late, it was going to make the project be about 26 weeks late. So they had to have a meeting with the masonry subcontractor, and they still weren't crystallizing it. But when they actually put the schedule, and they had a BIM coordinator, because it was BIM modeled, they actually put the schedule showing the delay, progressive delay, on the project schedule. And the light went on for the masonry subcontractor. They brought in a lot more resources. They were able to get back in alignment for the time, and they were able to recover the time. So this is what this kind of thinking and collaboration brings. So the C is getting commitment, and then the T is team. It brings the team together. You solve a major problem, and that starts to bring you on track. So then next week, tomorrow, next month, when you get another problem occur, there's a lot of confidence within the team that you can resolve it, that you can solve it. So this is where this is sort of tying together. And that's where this methodology comes in, step by step by step. So I think it's very helpful for anybody. It's helpful for me with many years experience. It's helpful for somebody new in the field to sort of have a methodology or framework that they can tie to when they're planning a project, when they're updating a project, and when they're recovering a project. And then that gives you something to fall back on. And this has plenty of latitude for the variety of issues that come up. It's not totally fixated. We have some flexibility here. You know, if we can't get it too soon because it's going to cost too much, then we just go out a little bit further, but we don't go out to the end of the project. So we look for number 2 and 3 tying together as an example. Well, this is a for sure. Number 1, if we want to save time, we've got to shorten critical path items. We can't save time by shortening float times. So that's a for sure one. Experimenting, that's the good thing about having good data. We can try things, we can experiment, we can do what ifs. What if we did it this way? What if we did it that way? We can really question ourselves. We can bring in expertise. We can filter it. And then really working with people to make sure that they know what we need. So we have clarity. We set the expectations. We're consistent in our processes. It's going to be easier to build commitment. And we do this with a moderate amount of success. We're not going to be successful all the time. We talked about probabilities, but we've really increased our probabilities. We've reduced the downside. Going back to the earlier lectures, we have contingencies in place for the known unknowns, for those reserves. We have some for the unknown unknowns, management reserves. So we got a little bit of flexibility. There's going to be a lot of confidence built in the team. It's not going to be a negative kind of team. And I'll bring this up later on too. I didn't want to do too much in this one lecture, but circle of influence. If you are running projects and you are having problems with your self-organizing, keeping the lid on things, and you're always in reactive mode, you're not going to be at your best. You're going to be kind of tense. You're going to be negative. And when you're tense and you're negative, you radiate that out to everybody that you deal with. So if you're making a lot of demands on people because you're reacting to things, you don't have a process in place, they get tense and they get their backs up. So subcontractors that you're wanting to do all these extra things, there's a lack of communication, things aren't flowing well, their backs are going to be up because they're going to start to lose money. You're tight because you're losing money. So then you get into adversarial relationships, extra claims that are really questionable, and the whole infrastructure of the team kind of breaks down. And not only if you're the leader and your team then interacts maybe with the subcontractors, with clients, with the community. That radiates that negative influence outside of that. So that's a real sort of negative kind of impact. Now, we can flip this around and we can say, well, if we're doing these things and we're doing it in a very prescribed way, in a consistent way, and we're meeting with success on this because of the process, the same thing when you're, instead of negative, you're going to radiate positive responses. People are going to, your team is going to be pretty assured that you can figure things out. Something went south, we can work on this, collaborate, engage, and figure this out. The people that you deal with are going to feel, compared to the other projects they're on, that's the good thing about construction. There's a lot of lousy contractors and a lot of lousy run projects. So if you're able to be even moderately better than most, that's going to stand out. And so that's going to have a positive influence. You're going to have better engagement. You're going to have less adversarial relationships, less negative, unnecessary claims. And this is going to be create the culture on your projects that you want and help to lead you to better and higher success. So that's why I'm saying this is I know it's just a few slides, but it's really fundamentally important to get your head in this because you're thinking about spending your careers on this. And I think it's a good framework to think about things. So that was kind of that one in 4A, which is kind of leading up to that. Is there any parts of that that seem fuzzy or doesn't make sense or something that you need clarified on that? Sometimes too, when you're doing something a lot, it's worth it to sort of break it down and look at it from a step-by-step process. That's how you improve your efficiencies in that. And so, I didn't have this all the time. I kind of over time got an idea that this is what's being done, and maybe it could be clarified into, fairly easy steps to understand. So you kind of want to think about it in those terms. And I kind of used anatomy for the simple reason that when somebody's sick, right, you want to recover from the sickness. So what do you got to do? What are the things that you need to do from that? So that's where the recovery aspect comes from, because your project is kind of sick when it is being delayed and there's cost overruns and there's issues. So how do we ensure that we can ensure the overall health of the project? So the second part kind of takes the high level view. And so I kind of use this metaphorical example, which again, is just looking at things from a high level. I'll let you look at the video for the whole thing because I actually want to get into that little discussion case, but I still want you to think about this. I kind of use this example of wayfinding in the Pacific Ocean, where it's a craft going back hundreds of years ago, where they could find, the ancient Polynesians could find one island to another island, return back with little more than really strong knowledge of the stars, the wind, etc. And so they have this plan of how to get from their home island to the destination island. So you could think about like Fiji to Hawaii, thousands of miles on a big flat bottom canoe, basically, that they were able to put provisions into and move pretty reliably from that island back and forth. And so that required a lot of skills. Well, project management's the same thing. It requires a lot of skills. And we've talked about these things in our site management course and in this course. And so you have to have a baseline schedule that has a baseline cost loading to it. You have to have a vision of where you want to go. And then you start updating, just like we just did. So you update, you get off course. Well, that's where we put in the direct method here. In between, we have weekly short-term meetings, right? Short-term planning schedules, and we'll talk about that coming up. So then we've got to come up with a plan to recover, and we work ourselves back to the original plan, and we adjust the original plan so it becomes our new master schedule, and we're back on track, just like that example that I went through with the forming. Then something else happens. Get ourselves back on track, do another recovery. This goes on and on and on during your project. But if you keep doing that, you keep it under control, and that will help you to reach your destination. So you don't do that, then you do like a lot of construction projects. They kind of just meander. You're stuck in the ocean. There's a storm comes up, takes you off track. You keep floating adrift, and before long, you're like the Titanic, different ocean. You hit the iceberg and you sink. Your project sinks. So it's kind of a way of thinking at a very high level. What we just talked about previously was a very granular level. Now this is a high level. You need to look both short-term and long-term when you're managing projects. Site superintendents tend to look a little bit more short-term. Project managers tend to look a little more long-term. And of course, what we're trying to do is reduce the variation, the variability, keep ourselves on track. And new technologies, that's where this is coming in. That's where BIM can help. That's where lean construction methods can help. All of these things to try to reduce the amount that we go off track. It's not going to eliminate it, but it's going to reduce it. And that's the constant goal that we're working towards. So that was kind of the lecture. And then I kind of finish it up with a few other items, which I'll let you see when you watch the videos. I just wanted to, let's see now. Just wanted to get to Microsoft project. Can you see that now? Okay.
Yes.
Great. Okay, so I put this file on Blackboard. It should be under the lectures. I think, what did I call it? I called it, I think I called it just bathroom update. Oh, I probably put a note. I called it, I think, lecture 4 live, just for discussion. So I put this file up so you can open it up. It's just a Microsoft project file. And what I did was, it's kind of like what we did last week, right? Remember we did a bathroom layout. So I kind of added a few more costs to it. And when we did the live lecture, live lab last week. So I added a few more costs to it. But what I did was I updated it. So what I did was I updated it roughly about a month into the project. And so I made a couple of things not going exactly the way that I wanted. So if I wanted to go check that, like I put in a status date, and I'll go through this in the labs, the detail of how to do the update. But definitely when I updated it, if I go to my variant screen, I have a few variances that are going on. So I have procurements is delayed by 12 days. Overall, my project is only delayed by 1 day. And so I probably want to look at that in the tracking Gantt, see, kind of get an idea as what's going on. So I could slide down and I could look at the tracking Gantt and try to figure out what's going on with the tracking Gantt. So I could take a look over here. I could slide along. And I can kind of see, well, it started on time. Actually, too, I'm going to go back to the variance screen. So I'm in the tracking Gantt now. I'm going to the variance screen. So there you go. Now I can see the start variance. So I see I pretty much started everything on time. Something went out of whack with my procurements. So I probably want to put a note as to why this took so long, right? And you could put a note that would say something. It would be whatever actually happened, right? So it's your project. It would be whatever actually happened. But I could put a note and say, procurements delayed due to original plumbing sub deciding not to sign off on project. All right, so I got that, right? So I know what went on there. So I put a note there, so I know what went on there. And then rip out existing bathroom. And so then we could also put a note there. So I could put a note for that. So I've kept this fairly simple in this example. So I've got a note from that. what I really should do is, I'm not getting into changes, but there would be a change requirement for the asbestos because that wasn't included in the original price. We're going to do that in another class, changes. I'm going to insert the status date line because I like to see it here. So I'm going to go grid lines, and I'm going to pull this down to status date, put in a solid line and a red line, just so I can see it. I usually like to see that. So I know this is where we're updated to. This stuff is done. This stuff we still have to do. All right. So my update on this has been looking back. So I've been looking in reverse, right? So my update is very rear looking, rear window looking. So I see what the variance is in time. I'd like to see what the variance is in cost. So I'd like to see what's going on with the cost aspect. So let's take a look here. So I can see that I just went to the cost tab. So I think you probably did the, all of this stuff on recovering time and that sort of thing and updating last year, but I'm not so sure that you got so much into the cost. You probably got added cost and stuff, but actually analyzing it and looking at it, probably not so much. So we had a baseline because I saved the project as a baseline. I set the baseline. We'll talk about this in the lab, but really I'm looking at this case for now. We set the baseline. That's our plan. And when we set the baseline, it gave us a baseline for cost and time. Not just time, but cost too. And so now we updated the project and we had some variable costs. And where we have variable costs, we have differences. So we have differences in our overall cost. Now I probably had some resources applied to the top, maybe to pre-construction as well. Let's see. I'm going to insert the resource names tab here. No, I just had it over here. So I've got a resource over here. The PM applied 10% overall. I also have, so I can see I've got a variance here. So it's going to be an oddball number because I made the project manager only 10% over pre-construction because they're just spending a little bit of time on that. So that there's a variance there because actually this ended up taking longer for them. So they actually ended up spending more time on that. Even though this didn't drive the project critically, this actually drove the project critically. This actually had a bit of float, even though it took a lot longer, but it still added cost because the project manager was spending a little bit more time, and it was 10% of the time. And in this case, it probably did take them a lot of extra effort because they had to find another subcontractor. So that's where your $112 is coming in. And then here I see that there's $400 difference, but I also see that this is showing $724 difference. So I don't see any other differences down here, and it's only going to go as far as I've updated it on a lot of these if I didn't change anything down here. So where is the other $324 coming in, right? So I want to figure out exactly what's going on there, but I see that the Site Super lead carpenter's 50% applied, and that the project manager, what did I do with that? I'd have to see. Project manager is, oh, project materials 3,000. Did I have the project manager on this too? So I have to take a little bit longer look, and the PM's 15%. So I got all these little oddball percentages that are going to give me kind of an oddball number in here, but I really don't know exactly how that's falling out, other than I know stuff is going on with that extra day here, right? I know that this is partly because of those extra days that are involved with this over here. I'd like to see it a little bit more granular per resource, what's going on, right? So I can kind of see where the activities it's coming in, but I'd like to see it a little bit more granular by resource. This is nice. I can clearly see that this is taking an extra carpenter, an extra day, right? So that I can clearly see. So originally, I think this was at 2 days, and now it's at, so you can see originally it was at 2 days, the Thursday and the Friday, and now I've got one extra working day. So that's where that extra $400 is on the carpenter. That's one extra day. I'm assuming the carpenter must be getting paid $50 an hour, 8 hours a day. That would be $400. So I'm going to slide to the left, and I'm going to go check the resource sheet. And I'm going to look at cost. And so now I can see the variances. So these are the variances that was caused by that 1 day of extra time with the asbestos, and the partly a little bit with the PM on that 10% with the procurement taking longer. And if I want to just look at individual resources, what's taking more, I can very clearly see it on the variances, because these are work. And so these are variable costs. Variable costs simply mean the longer it takes, it's just calculating more hours, more dollars per hour, and that's where you're getting those costs to come into play. So I can kind of see it there pretty well. So I'm going to go back to my Gantt chart. So the next thing that I would do is that I would save this, and I'm going to get into file naming protocols with you later on, but to keep it simple for now, I would save this. Sorry, do a save as, and I would browse. I'll just put it back. I would typically put it in my I'm going to call it, because I've already done an update, I would call it, let's say, update B. All right. So now what I would like you to do is to look at this file, right? And maybe what I'll do is I'll put you into groups of I'll put you into 4 breakout rooms, and I'll let you discuss how using the direct method. So I want you to think, detect along the critical path, look more immediate than late, right? So we look for reducing the cost. Look for experimenting, try experimenting. So try those first 4. The commitment, that would be whatever you're trying to do, whoever you want to do it, they would have to agree to it, right? And you do all that, then the team gets the value. But for technical purposes with this, I want you to try the direct method and see what works best. Now you can discuss it, like maybe chat about it in your groups. Maybe somebody shares it on the screen and you try some different things on it with the person just trying some inputs into it, or you try it on your own screen and then you discuss it with people and see what choices you are, and make sure that you check the cost screen to see when you try something, when you experiment with something, what did it do to the costs? And you may find that you can save the time and actually come out more ahead with the cost, actually saving money overall. If it shows like brackets or negative, then that's saving money. That's a good thing. So try it and take a little, I'll put it for 15 minutes and then we'll come back, we'll come back at say a quarter after. If you get a little bit of a break in there too, that's good. And then we'll just discuss, we'll bring it home those options. Does that make sense for everybody? This file is loaded in Blackboard on lecture under lecture 4 for the discussions, right? So it's on Blackboard under live lecture and it says live. That's where it is. So under your lectures tab there. So somebody can put it, share it on your screen. You can also download it and play with it and try it. That's the nice thing about this kind of thing. You can always save as a different name and play around with it and see what happens. And if you mess something up, you could always re-download it and try it again. Any questions? Okay, then I'll open up the rooms and let you try it. Good luck.
Just around, just below, just a tiny bit below the headboard. Always something with me.
I might have to adjust it later. You tell me, okay?
Wash your hands. Here's the bag.
Oh, yeah.
But you know what, nobody was there, so I'm thinking overnight, nobody touched anything, you know, didn't have a chance.
So how did you do? How did you do? Anybody want to share their screen on what they're thinking? Quang, how about you? Any ideas? Usually have some ideas. Or Sanjay, go ahead.
I don't know, sir. I didn't quite get how to figure it out. You know, like the interface is like different from what we normally use for the first part of it, so it was quite confusing to me.
Okay, so let's maybe, anybody else have trouble looking at it or figuring out where to start? If nobody says anything, I'm going to assume all of you had no problem and that you have a clear answer. Unlike Sanjay, who's probably being totally honest and straight up right off the bat. So if I call on a name, I'm going to assume you got a really good response. Or if I see in the chat, no, I had problems, then maybe I'll have a better handle of where people are at. So I don't see anything in the chat. So Nick, how did you do? Nick, you there? Leanne, how about you?
Yeah, same with Sanjay. I wasn't really sure like where to start. I looked at the Slack and everything was 0, so I wasn't sure.
Well, that's
Everything
good.
was on the critical path. So.
Actually, it's good. That's why I wanted to do this in part of the lecture time, is to try to spend a little bit of time on these things. So when we get into the lab and you're actually doing stuff, you kind of can better connect with it. So you know what? I'm not at all surprised, because it does take a little bit of time and a little bit of getting used to it, right? So definitely I'm going to suggest to everybody to make sure that you go back and you look at the videos. Even if you watch them once, I think it will help again for A and for B I'm talking about. The other thing is you will find that the tutorials, I think it's tutorial 5 and 6, will be very helpful. The Microsoft project tutorials, where I actually walk through how to do it, because I'll do it in the lab for sure in a different example, but I think it's just helpful to really sort of take it in. But let's bring up, let's see, that's the update. Okay, so let's share the update file. And let's take a look and think about it a little bit methodically. So for me, what I would do is, of course, I would save it, file, save as, and I think I called it, maybe I called it, I would call it recovery B. I'm just going to save it to my desktop because I don't care to keep it really. And so I tend to like to be in the tracking Gantt. When I'm kind of like trying to get time back, I like to be in the tracking Gantt and the variance screen. And you know what? You can always customize individual columns. So a lot of times when I'm in this screen, a lot of the times I will insert the duration column, and I will very often insert the cost column and sort of see what's going on. Now there is a cost variance column. So you can insert cost variance, which is kind of cool. So I can see, you know, what's going on. I didn't have to do that because I didn't show you that. I didn't expect it, but this is my way of you seeing stuff more in real time. But if I followed the direct method, anything to the left of the status date, it's done. You know, I already said what happened, it's done. So I can't fix this, but I do know what went wrong, and I've documented it in the notes, right? And, you know, in this particular screen, if I even wanted to see the notes, I could always insert the indicator column, which shows notes, right? So I could always see what's going on, right? So if I wanted to, I could do that. If I don't want to, I don't have to. But I've got the variance here. So I kept it fairly small, the variance, so we could see it on the screen. And I can see that this is going to take an extra day because we only maybe got the asbestos remediated. We got to finish, or we're going to remediate the asbestos part on the Monday. So that's where we're at with this project. So I would start to think about, well, where can I save some times? And so what comes to mind is I think I could save some time on the inspections. Now, if I'm I'm replanning the work here, right? So I think that I could shorten the inspections by 1 day. So if I shorten the inspections by 1 day, that actually brings me back on track. So all that would probably require is me to really coordinate with my subs to try to make sure that the inspections all get done on this Friday, Friday, the March 12th. So that's probably not inconceivable with this much time to really sort of line that up. So if that is what I'm thinking about doing, because it's in the future, right? This is replanning. This is not doing, this is replanning. This is developing a new path of how to get yourself back on track towards meeting your project objectives. So if that was the case, I've looked along the critical path, right? I'm not looking at this one in blue. That's useless, saving time there. I'm looking along the critical path and I'm saying, well, you know what? We could shorten that by a day. I don't see any extra costs involved in that. So I detected along the critical path. I looked sooner rather than later. This, I know I can't fix this yet. And maybe I looked at this, well, I've only got one day. It's going to take a day, so I can't do much here. These looks like they're going to take that time. I can't really shorten that. So the only one that I saw immediate was this one. So that's as close to it, but that's okay. That's pretty close. So that's fine. So that's the detecting the D, the immediate, the I. I'm not sure how much this is going to reduce things yet, but I do know that at this point, I have a cost variance. Well, actually, if I cancel this just for a second, I put this up to 2 days, right? This is where we were at, right? This is where we were at. So I do know that by shortening that by a day, watch, right? That shortens, that's going to save me a substantial amount of money there, right? So instead of having 836, I now have 512. And if I wanted to, before I did that, I could also go in and analyze, like we did before, the resource sheet, the costs. Where are these extra costs, right? I could even take a copy of this. I could copy and paste that in Excel to keep it separate. I could take a screenshot of that if I wanted to. Or I could always go back to my update file, and this will be here. So in my update file, I could have it. I could even split the screen and look at it, in the update file. And this is now the recovery file. So this is the before, right? So I could look at that. I could go back to my Gantt chart. And then what was I doing? Inspections, change that to 1 day, brings it back to 51 days. In the tracking Gantt, I should have went to the tracking Gantt when I did that. Okay, in the tracking Gantt, I see that now I'm only $512, right? Difference. This has kind of burned me a little bit with the extra cost of the PM there. So if I'm trying to get back to zero cost on this particular one, because I kind of burned that extra with that extra labor of that carpenter assigned here, working that extra time. So if I actually want to get that time, that money back on this project, not just the time, I might have to look at something else to shorten. So maybe, for example, I look at the installed drywall and tape. All right. But actually, before I do that, I want to put a note here: inspections approved, get you into the good habits, and say, got commitment of electrical, HVAC, and plumbing subs to line up inspections for March, Friday, March 12th. Click OK. I'm just keeping track of what I need to do, right? Because this is useless if they say, no, there's no way we can get that. Well, then that's not a good plan. Then we go back and we look again, because there's a lot of different ways you could do this. I'm just looking at it from my experience of doing something like this, right? Install drywall and tape drywall. Well, maybe I'm looking at that. Okay, it's a bathroom. We can get the drywall installed in 1 day, 2 days max, right? And we don't need 4 days if we use some Durabond 90 in the mix of the taping compound. It'll dry faster. We can definitely get it taped in 3 days. So 5 days is realistic in this particular case for this. We can knock off a day. So I'm going to look at reducing that to 5 days. We're currently at $512, right? We're currently at 400 over here, right? So I'm going to try that. So that took off $400 on that, right? And so we've got a savings of $400. And it actually overall is now bringing us to a cost variance of $212, right? So overall, it's bringing us to being cheaper than we originally were. Where is that being impacted? Let's take a look back on the resource sheet. What's going on? So we definitely got a savings because when it shortened it, it made it less expensive for the actual, this is where we've got a pretty good savings. This just brought the carpenters back in line. The reason it brought it back in line was they were over by $400 before because of the asbestos thing in the bathroom. And then that shortening that a day, that brought them back to even. But because our project's short overall, it's taking fewer days than we planned. Remember, I think it was what, 10% on the sites. It was 10% on the site. No, we can go check. How much percentage was the site super on the project? So I think 50%. I think the site super lead carpenter was 50%. So that day is actually saving half a day in costs of the site super. And if we remember, what was the site super getting paid? We go to entry. The site super was getting paid $60 an hour. That makes sense. So 8 hours is $480. But because it's 1 day less, and they're assigned 50% to the project, that is saving half of $480. That's $240. And because the PM is assigned 15% to the whole project, that's how much value that is of the PM for that day. So that's why you're seeing these differences that come in place here, right? So overall on the project though, now we're better than we planned. So if I actually go to the cost screen here, the original baseline was 46,264. If we continue with this new plan, it should only cost us 46,052. So we're at, even though we had some bumps, we've actually figured out a better way to get through it. And you know what? As you get closer to the work, you see more opportunities very often. When you're planning and we've talked about in the first class, you're estimating, this was sort of what we estimated for the project. We budgeted from that, but hopefully we've got a little bit of flexibility in that. But as you get closer to the work, that's where short-term planning and cost control can help you to look for these little opportunities of savings. You're going to have these disruptions, but you also get these little opportunities that you need to be able to take advantage of so that you can better deal with the other disruptions as they come up. So I don't know, is that sort of resonating with you a little bit? I'm hoping that week by week it's going to start to resonate a little bit more. And for sure, once we get doing this in the lab and you start playing around with it yourself, it should resonate more. But how do people feel about that, seeing that in action?
So, sir, so basically what you just did, to sum up, you find tasks that didn't really need a specific amount of days and subtract days, which in result is going to subtract costs as well to get back on track, right?
So you're starting to realize there is a cost to every day we're on this project.
Right.
And so this is what I've been saying from the first 2 or 3 lectures, where I'm connecting time with money. If we can shorten the duration and we have variable costs like a project manager on this project, a site super on this project, a whole project team, if we're able to do this more efficiently, more quickly, that will save us money. But it works in reverse when we get delays and impacts and it takes us longer. Even if our subcontractors don't cost more, which very often they will, because if you start delaying them, they're going to put in claims. Even if they take longer and we have a cost associated with them, we have variable costs like our own workers, people paid by the hour. If they're there longer, ka-ching, 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 this is upping your costs. And so if we have opportunities where we can make savings, it can be very beneficial to a project. I think, you know, and I got this from the Bird had this guy and he's kind of like a closer for them, meaning that when they get a project that's a little bit in trouble, they call this guy to come in as a senior project manager and, you know, save it. And what he was always telling me was, really, people don't get that there's a per diem cost per day of running your project, and you got to hammer that back, hammer that back. So it's not surprising to me that you as students have a little bit of trouble and getting a little bit confused looking at it, because he wasn't talking about students. He was talking about site supers and other PMs. So it has to, it's a way of thinking about the projects. Now, it doesn't mean you have to be running around worrying about 10 minutes here or 50 minutes there. You'll drive yourself nuts. But when you have it set up on a system and you can just experiment and get different ideas, why not? Why not? And that helps you to run things better. And if you get a culture on your project team thinking that way, then that's going to get you to that team positive circle of influence that I'm talking about, right? So it's really kind of an ongoing education process and a way of thinking about project management. This works for anything, not just this, you know. You're planning a wedding for somebody, it's going to work with that. It's all of these things come into play.
Sure, I have another question.
Yeah.
So based on what you were saying with the carpenter and the $400 over that he had, and you reduce it so it was zero when you look at your cost sheet, is it a good practice to have your, yeah, so you know the $400 there where you were talking about is,
Yeah.
is reduced, right? So are you saying it's a good practice to keep the variance as low as possible or to zero?
Well, you know what, you can't, like, you have a plan and things are going to happen that you didn't plan on. Hopefully, that's why I kind of did from island to island, the wayfinders. Hopefully you can keep the variation minimally, like, so it's not getting out of control. So yes, if you could keep it to zero, fantastic, Sanjay. But all I can tell you is I've never been able to keep it to zero. So I'm not sure that you'll be able to keep it to zero on everything. But when it goes outside, you are looking at it and you are asking why. And is there something I can do to stop this from continuing on this project? Do I need to have a discussion with this sub, with this resource? Can we resolve this particular issue so it doesn't keep happening over and over again? And how can we look at getting that time back and that cost back, right? What we just did. So it's keeping it under wraps. You're not going to be perfect at this. Nobody plans things perfectly, but you do your best with what you know at that time. You expect there's going to be all those kind of VUCA type of things happening around you. You've mitigated a lot of them in your plan, but still there'll be things. So the goal is, yes, let's keep that to zero or beat it, like have it negative. Great, right? Wonderful. If we get some that are a bit ahead, but overall we're beating it, then that's fine too, right? That's par for the course.
Thank you, sir.
Any other questions? Well, it's a start, right? So we will, oops. Got a couple of people just, I hope they weren't out for too long. Hi, Leanne, were you kicked out for very long? I think she's still getting back in. Hi, Leanne, were you out for very long or did you get, I didn't hear it ring, so I just saw you up there. Okay. Okay, so what I was sort of wrapping up on was just to, it's a step-by-step process. I kind of went over the example of a person from Bird who's like a closer that is really understanding where your costs are, your variable costs, what's your per diem cost for running this project per day. And when you start doing this, you start to really get a handle and an understanding on what's going on in your project. And then that gives you clarity on an approach to working on controlling costs. And you definitely, when you start doing this back and forth, you definitely see the connection between time and money. So if I go back to that variance screen, I know that if I up this to if I up this to 10 days, look what happens, right? It drastically impacts my cost. Now that might not be true because, well, it would be true if they're actually working on it and it's taking longer, right? So that would be true if that's the case. So you get the very good understanding of time and money, especially when you are monitoring work, hourly rates. But you also, even if it's something like a electrical subcontractor who's on the critical path, so I'm looking at who's on the critical path, and they take longer, 2 days longer, it ups too because the management costs. So you got 50% the site super and 15% the project manager, and those lengths extra times impacts the project as well. Even though maybe the electrical sub doesn't cost you anymore because they were under contract, they impact the rest of the project. One day is impacting you from, we're going from minus 212 to plus 112, right? So we've got a spread there of $324, right? So that comes into play. So keep that in mind as well, right? How these things will change and separate that. I think I ended up doing something there different. So what did I do? There, that's what was there before. Okay, so that's what I wanted to give you the lead in on, and we'll see you tomorrow in lab, and we'll start going through more of this updating process. If you're really still, kind of confused, definitely look at 4A, 4B. It's worth it. And MS Project Tutorial 5 and 6 will be helpful too for you, if depending where you're at, right? So I'm just trying to give you extra stuff if you're having any issues there. Okay, so other than that, we'll see you then tomorrow morning. I guess we start at 9, the normal time. Okay?
Yes,
All right,
sir.
bye, sir. Thank you.
Okay, take it easy.
See you then.
Okay.